This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher, E&P Magazine, housekeeping as usual, listening on whatever flavor of podcast channel you prefer. Please follow us. Watching us on YouTube, subscribe button below me, bell to the right, hit that thing, you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Rarely am I a little nervous when I invite a guest onto this program. And I am a little nervous today because it's Jeff Jarvis. May I call you Jeff, sir?
Of course.
Thank you, Jeff. And I was a little nervous because you're one of the smartest guys I know. I've been following you, let's see how far back I go to following you when you were Mr. Buzz Machine in 2001. Wow. I entered this industry then as well from radio and TV, started one of the first websites. And I got to tell you, you've always been kind of a leader. I read some of your books, Geeks Bearing Gifts 2014, right? Public Parts 2011. You got two new books coming out or just came out?
I do. One is called The Gutenberg Parenthesis, which is, I really geek out now on the age of print and ask what lessons there were to be learned from our entry into the age of print as we leave it.
All right, so you're basically doing a comparison to Gutenberg being like the first nerd, right?
Exactly. He was the first technology entrepreneur, actually. And by the way, he had to engage in risk capital to start the business.
This I did not know. And is that out now?
He had to buy all the paper, he had to buy the metal, he had to build the place, he had to do all that before he got any cash flow. So we ended up with a financier named Johann Fust, who ended up calling the loan and taking part of the business, which made a wag friend of mine ask whether you'd rather be First or Fust. And so that book is out in June. I have another book in the Bloomsbury Object Lessons series about the magazine as an object, which was kind of fascinating to look at. Here we're going to talk about newspapers, but when you think about magazines, they're on a similar arc. And their time, I think, and I started the magazine Entertainment Weekly. I loved magazines, but I think that their time in print is also coming to an eclipse. Which is a topic I do want to discuss with you, since that's kind of the industry I'm in right now. But why don't we just say this? We're going to chat one-on-one with Jeff Jarvis, the director of the Tao Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, right after this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
Jeff, topic number one, it's one of the reasons I sought you out. I've been watching you blog away, Twitter away, whatever we want to call it. I want to talk about the JCPA, if I may. I mean, that. If I may be so bold, our publisher of the year was just announced. Her name is Jennifer Bertetto. She is the CEO of Trib Total Media, but she was the one publisher invited by Amy Klobuchar to stand in front of that famous committee in February. Her exact words were, local news outlets should be able to negotiate for fair compensation from large digital platforms that use their content. Who is going to report on New Kensington, Pennsylvania, if my company doesn't do that? I reached out to Dean Riding, CEO of America's Newspapers, before this interview, showed him some of your posts about not being in favor of the JCPA. His exact words were, the JCPA will help level the playing field for publishers. Big tech has changed the dynamics of publishing by using our content without proper compensation. Jeff, you ain't in favor of this thing. You don't think newspapers should be going to Congress asking for fair compensation from Google and Facebook. The forum is yours. Why?
You hit on the exact right angle here, which is I think that it is a gross conflict of interest for publishers to use the political clout that is built up by decades and centuries of journalistic work and cash that in for political capital in Congress to try to pass protectionist legislation. I think that's ethically, morally, professionally wrong. We are to be independent politicians, not begging at their trough. That's point one. Point two, the money that the publishers think was taken by Google and Facebook was not given by God. Publishers had effective monopolies across this country, unlike Europe, and charged and had full pricing power and charged exorbitant rates. And given the opportunity to run away, advertisers did, because they were getting ripped off for years by newspaper publishers with their rates. And they found more efficacious, more efficient, better priced, more targeted advertising elsewhere. Now, publishers could have done something for that. I was in the industry then and worked for newspapers. I worked at Advance for 12 years. But we didn't want to cannibalize ourselves. We didn't want to upset our own cart. And so, we know the rest of history here. I was around for the New Century Network, may it rest in peace.
Yes.
And every effort to innovate went to naught. And so now to come around and say that Congress has to save their asses is ridiculous. I'm also concerned that this legislation, like that in Australia, like that in Canada, is going to benefit the big old legacy publishers and, in our country, their hedge fund controllers, rather than a whole population of new news startups in which I have some hope for the future of news. And so who gets to decide who gets this money and doesn't? Yeah, fine, they cut off the big papers and the Washington Post and the New York Times won't get any. Okay. But a lot of this is going to go into Alden's pocket and not into journalism.
All right, you are preaching to the choir on one point. I joined this industry obliquely from radio and TV. I was a radio guy, and we were the street fighters. And the most fat and lazy sales environment I was ever introduced to when I was running a radio group in New England was the Portland, Maine Press Herald, owned by a company called Guy Gannett. I mean, this was a family that went back 140 years, and they said, you're going to help us start a website. Because I was a nerd. I was carrying around my Toshiba laptop with the dual floppies on the side, running Maine Association of Broadcasters in the ad club. And I never saw a more demand-driven group of sellers. They didn't even know what selling was. Yeah. I remember walking into the classified room and seeing signs on the wall with hundreds of people, and they were just yelling at them, too many people are on hold, too many people. I mean, the demand was just so huge. I saw it. I remember, I know you because remember, I was hired by Ad One. You remember that? To get Abercat launched. And I flew all over the country trying to get everybody to do common classifieds when Billy Morris was head of the Newspaper Association of America screaming, we must aggregate our classifieds.
We could have done it. We could have done it, but we didn't.
We didn't. So but see, here's my other side to that. You're saying, well, tough boogies, you guys blew it. So go by the way of the dinosaur. The dinosaur didn't get away from the craters that developed and you're just saying it's ready to go away rather than protect journalism.
No, I'm not saying that. What I care about is journalism, not print. And I think that the problem is, so for years and years, and you've heard me say this probably a million times in obnoxious tweets and blog posts, I have been screaming to publishers for years that you had to foresee a date in the future, pick any date, closer the better for conservative ends. And if you are not fully sustainable as a digital enterprise by that date, then by the date when print becomes unsustainable, then you're dead. So we had to become digital enterprises. And I love the Newhouses. I worked for Advance for 12 years. Sure. I ended up leaving to teach, but I came back to work on their digital first project because they were honest enough to look and see what the prospects were, what was going to happen to FSIs, what was going to happen to legal ads, what was going to happen to continuing consolidation in retail. And so they did the digital first effort, in which, as you may remember, they kind of basically killed the papers, started them as new enterprises, moved newsrooms to new places, made everyone fully digital, and made print the byproduct. I was an advisor to Digital First when John Payton was
I remember those days. Yes.
right. And John had a real vision. Alden just got tired of it, and that was that. But John had a real vision for trying to make newspapers fully sustainable digital enterprises. There's no choice but to be. But what happens is you don't want to kill the cash cow. And so you keep the cash going, and I get that. I saw it live. I saw it when it came to classified. I saw what happened, in papers where $40 million in jobs classified went up in smoke in almost a day. And it wasn't Craigslist. And full disclosures here, I teach at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and Craig is a friend of mine, but he didn't ruin newspapers. And Google and Facebook have both contributed to my school. So judge me as you will. But I don't think that the tech companies owe us anything. I think that we, in our industry, in our field, in journalism, blew it too often. But I think the transition is going to be long, and some old legacy companies can and should survive, and some new sprouts will come up out of the ashes, and we'll have new journalism.
Full disclosure, I was 2003, 4, whatever. Bob Cawthorn, do you remember him? He was running the San Francisco Chronicle Digital, flew me in, they were my client, and yelled at me that it was my fault that I wasn't helping them beat Craig Newmark. And this little digital ugly website he kept looking at, cursing at, called Craigslist. I agree with you. I remember how I would ascertain real estate agents who called us the necessary evil and said if they had one way to get out of that paper, they were going to find a way to do it someday. And we knew we were that necessary evil because if they didn't have their ad in the paper, the seller would scream at them. So we kept raising their rates and treating them like garbage. Automotive, the same thing. It was just lineage. I get that. I get our stupidity. I'm there with you. I mean, and I came in obliquely, as I told you, but what about the survival of small towns now? That one paper of record who didn't lose all those classifieds, who just watched their revenues, how should I say this, be scooped up by Facebook and Google, because 70% of local ad revenue does get scooped up. FSIs went, we get that. How do you help that guy, or do you let him go away and hope to God some digital entrepreneur, a new startup, helps that small town in the middle of nowhere?
Clay Shirky of New York University, said years ago that there's no sure path, that there's only chaos ahead in this point of transition. So I don't have any promises. You read my book, Geeks Bearing Gifts, and I wrote a post 2 years later admitting where I was wrong. I thought that hyperlocal blogs were building blocks for a new news ecosystem. I was wrong because it's hard to get journalists to do that.
Yes.
I think a few things. One, I think we needed to start with the cost side of journalism. And by that, I don't mean the way Alden looks at it. I mean the way a newsroom should look at it. In the problem we have, I think, is that we repeat and copy each other too much, which is, by the way, time honored. In the earliest days of newspapers, they were distributed for free through the mail. There were jobs known as scissors editors who were to scissor up other newspapers to be able to publish other stuff. Thereby, we started kind of a national network of news in the early days of this country. So that's time honored, but the time for that is gone with digital when you don't need multiple copies of anything. Syndication is gone.
Exactly.
We repeat each other constantly. I look at newsrooms where I see people looking at what's trending on Twitter, and then they try to get SEO, and they try to get social clicks for rewriting what everybody else has written, rather than having unique local value. So I think we've got to concentrate on that value. And I think that some local publishers can do it. They can survive. They're going to have to get past print. They're going to have to figure out how to become sustainable digitally. And I think FSIs are going away. And I think legal ads, this really, you want to piss off your audience. I think legal ads should go away because the web is a more efficient means of distributing.
You just pissed off a whole mess.
I pissed off a whole bunch of them. But I think it's shock therapy to say, guys, they're likely to go away. So fine, hold on to them and lobby for them as long as you wish, but know that FSIs are shrinking away because companies see direct relationships with their consumers, know that legals are going away. And then what is the remaining reason then to print and distribute a product? It goes away. So I'm not the enemy. It's reality.
Oh, I get that. And I did stand in front of a huge classified conference back in 2004, maybe, or 5, after ascertaining realtors and said, you're going to lose this business. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to own the sell side. I want you to bring in a real estate agency, and I want you to own the sell side. Let them all have the buy side. Do just sure sell $500 homes. You'll own it in your towns. And they screamed at me, we'll lose our big dog realtors. I can't do that. I can't do that. And they lost them anyway. I'm with you.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second. I'm surprised the Newhouses did not fire me, because soon into my tenure there, I think it was there like 2 weeks.
Yes.
I said, we should become a real estate agent.
Of course.
So that we can get access to the
MLS database, right? And just do it.
And one of them looked at me and said, are you nuts? Those are our friends. And I said, they're not going to be for long.
They hate you. I'm with you. I feel the pain of this fat, and I say it to them. When I say them, I mean us, because I'm part of this industry. This industry that just could not move. It was like a ship that couldn't turn. But let me reverse it, because I only want to spend half of our time on JCPA. Then I got to do speed dating with you and a whole mess of other provocations that you have put out there in our industry. But let me just ask you what I'm going to reverse it now. I'm going to give you a little background. Do this in 1 minute. I have a degree in marine biology from GW and became a disc jockey. That's how I got into media. I just wasn't. And for 8 years, I was a DJ and I was on the talent side. I wasn't that talented. So I eventually went into sales, then in management. But I remember the days at radio stations I managed where we had to always do ASCAP and BMI, which means here came these big forms. You had to write down every song you played. Every song was in a commercial, so the composer could get compensated. That legislation or that law, that copywriting, whatever you want to call it, I learned later, goes all the way back to piano rolls. I mean, when someone, remember, news publishing was sheet music back in the 1800s, and the piano roll company started, and they said, we're helping you. We're making your songs more popular in the bars and everything. And then the composer said, no, we are going to be compensated. And to that, still to this day, a song you listen to in a store, that composer, why isn't it just logical to you that if we create a piece of journalistic content and we own it and we stamp it in some Bitcoin, whatever weird way, that we can't get a few cents for it when it's clicked on? You disagree with
a few things.
Yes.
Number one, Google and Facebook were not taking the entirety of your article. They were linking to your article. They were bringing value to the publisher by sending them
like
audience.
The piano roll playing the song, but go ahead.
And so, and the problem was there was never a market value set for that. Google in the early days said, we're not going to take payment for placement within search results. Yahoo was doing that. Yahoo was taking payment. That was creating a market value for that link. But Google said, no, that's going to affect the value of our search, so we're not going to do that. So there's no market value created for the value of the link. And the publishers keep on trying to ignore that value. Point one. Point two, when copyright started in the Statute of Land and in 1710, and then in this country in the following centuries, news was not included. Newspapers were not included. Magazines were not included. Even when it started including newspapers, the belief was it should only include kind of features which were unique, not news, because news was a commodity of need and necessity to the democracy. So this hanging behind copyright doesn't calculate to me. Third, we also see as part of this argument that the publishers are saying, well, but big old Google antitrust. Newspapers' behavior in antitrust has been horrendous over the years.
Yes.
When radio came in, there's a great book by
them tooth and nail. Yes.
Gwyneth Janeway, who wrote about the war against, it's called The Media at War by Gwyneth Jackaway, pardon me, which talks about how newspapers tried to restrict radio from carrying any news, or from carrying only the news the newspapers provided and paying them for it, or also forbid them from discussing news stories until 12 hours after the event. This is the history of our newspaper industry. It is not honorable when it comes to this. So now they come around and say, well, we want an exception to antitrust here to be able to negotiate with Google. Well, negotiate for what? Negotiate for that. What's happened now is that what they've done is they've forced Facebook out of the effort of helping news. Facebook has said, screw it. We were trying to be nice to you for years. It did no good. So now they've pulled away from all their payments, and this is what we've ended up with. My fear, my horrible nightmare fear that a colleague of mine brought up is that if JCPA passes, and if the Canadian law passes, and we find ourselves in the boat of Australia where big money from the platforms is forced to go to big publishers, then I fear that Google might say, oh, to hell with Google News Initiative, which is helping a lot of small news efforts start.
That's
it's helping a lot of big publishers too.
They wanted to give you that cash so you would say those words, that they're lobbying us by throwing
They are. No question about it.
$200 million. That's a rounding error.
They are lobbying the newspapers, right? And the newspapers, and you know what? My view is, fine, take their money and do good things with it. But here's the key of all of this. Getting some baksheesh from Google and Facebook is a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. It is not sustainable. What we need in news is sustainable business models for a long future. And getting some bucks now out of Google is not a business model.
So
it
in other
is
words,
a short-term corruption for hedge funds to improve their cash flow, and it doesn't do jack for journalism in the long run.
Early 90s, president of the Maine Association of Broadcasters, Bill Cohen, George Mitchell, two of the most powerful senators were Maine. And the National Association of Broadcasters would fly me in every other month because they'd rather see the local guy than the national guy, to scream at them about retransmission consent.
Yes.
That was what I kept screaming. And please let us keep our beer advertising. That we kept. But anyway, retransmission consent. How dare cable companies take our content and monetize?
But they were taking the full content, by the way, but go ahead. Yes.
We won that one. And to this day, what's keeping a local television station newsroom afloat is those fees from Hulu. I mean, come on, that's working at least there to keep journalism going in some way, shape, form, or size. What say you to that? Then we'll move on. Go ahead.
But then here's the other problem. We live in the United States of America, and we have a First Amendment. And we don't believe in this country in government involvement in speech and the press. And so I am allergic to the idea that we're going to end up with licensed journalists. Who gets the money and who doesn't?
Okay, that's
who benefits and who doesn't.
I believe, how do you even define what a journalist is in a free and unfettered society? Is the blogger with the cats on her lap in her basement a journalist?
If she's helping the community and reporting on things that happen, yes. Or look at City Bureau in Chicago, which is training citizens to collaborate in covering their own communities and pay them to do it. Or look at Outlier Media in Detroit, which is using text to answer people's questions and do that collaboratively. I think that one of the futures of journalism is going to be collaboration with the communities rather than just speaking to them, because we're small now. We can't afford to do it on our own.
All right. We're going to leave JCPA because that is just such a hot topic right now, as you know, and we're going to do the speed dating on some of the other issues. You came out with this 20 post-it note provocation on media, which I spread around to a few people just to get some feet. I had to, because, I'm not smart. I'm just an old sales guy. And here I am going one-on-one with Jeff Jarvis, which, I want to do my homework. You hit a topic that, I don't know if, when we were in the green room, but there was no green room. We chatted before I turned the record button. I was telling you, I went to 18 conferences this year. I did the circuit, everything from Wyoming Press to New York Press to Mega Conference, all them and more. And one of the number one topics is somebody stood up and talked about paywalls, reader revenue. Moreover, the sponsor of this very broadcast is advertising a paywall service. And now the reason you're on the show is I was watching you on Twitter just talking about how paywalls damage democracy. Expound.
Okay.
Why would
I'm
you
not
say
against having a paywall.
Okay.
Your sponsor cannot cancel you right now.
Okay, thank God, because I need the cash.
But it's only one of many strategies. Point one. Point two, paywalls tend to be a winner-take-most market. So that I asked the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford to use their data to tell me what the proportion was of digital news subscriptions. And they said that 2/3, 63% of all digital news subscriptions in the US about a year and a half ago go to three brands: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Everybody else splits the rest. And the economics of the paywall for the New York Times, I had Martin Nissenholtz, who was then the vice president of news at the New York Times, come and speak to my class many years ago. And he went through the economics of it, and he explained that the New York Times, because it was free, had a huge audience. Because of that huge audience, it could have a small conversion to paid, and it would still be a large number. Because it was the Times, they could charge a large amount. Because it was the Times, they were going to have low churn. Because it was the Times, they could afford to give up some advertising for that. Because it was the Times, they could succeed at the paywall, and God bless it. And Martin said what he feared was that every newspaper in America would think it was the New York Times. And so paywalls are a strategy, and I'm fine with pursuing that. But I think the important phrase you used before when you were questioned at the conference is reader revenue. That's not just a paywall.
No, of course not.
And so I think that membership has a lot of potential. Jay Rosen at New York University started the membership puzzle, and you can go find all of their data online. And I think there's a lot of exciting things to do there. Now, membership is not the same as a paywall or a subscription. A subscription says, I give you money, you give me content. Membership says, I belong to something.
Exactly.
Something I care about. So what I've tried to get publishers to do for years, and with no success at all, is to think past the mass, past the one-size-fits-all product, to communities that they serve, multiple communities. And so the easy example to use is, what if you wanted to start something to serve young parents? Now, there's not a lot of news in diapers and poop, but there's all kinds of things that you can serve young parents with, don't we know, right? Service journalism, advice, bargains on things parents have to buy, access to other parents in the community, access to experts and doctors. There's all kinds of things that you could do there. When you do that, you get first-party data. You now know the person who's using that as a parent. You get advertising opportunities there. You get opportunities for the parent to say, I really belong, I value this community. They might pay for that community. They may not like your brand as a newspaper, but they may pay for that community and may help support it, and you get reader revenue that way. You can do events to get money out of them. You can do commerce to get money out of them. I convinced one newspaper chain in the country to start a commerce arm, and within a year it had a $2 million revenue stream. So I'm all for consumer revenue, but look at it broadly, and don't just think of the old model is that I have a product called content, and God darn, I'm going to sell it to you.
But there's also publishers screaming that they're just doing it I call it the guilt method. Whenever I say that, people boo me. I mean, I did Colorado Press just last month, and we talked about the Aurora Sentinel now doing the Green Bay Packer model. They're going to sell physical shares that mean nothing, so you feel like you're part of the news. But I just said, that's just like public broadcast. I remember when I was a DJ, I used to be the number one fundraiser. I'd stand there with the phone banks behind me and say to the audience, what if Sesame Street was not there for your kids? Guilt them to get that mug. Phones would ring.
Guilt. Well, it's not. Guilt works, and also responsibility works. A nicer word.
All right.
Guilt works at the Guardian. I worked with them on their membership plan some years ago, and we realized pretty quickly it wasn't a membership plan; it was a begging plan. And at the end of every article, Kath Viner, the editor of the Guardian, says, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? You just read this wonderful journalism, and you didn't give us money to support it. Come on." Or even I, who do give, it says, well, you read 60 articles this month. Shouldn't you give more? That works. But I also think it's something about, there's a wonderful video from Amanda Palmer, the singer, on TED Talks. I rarely recommend TED Talks, but it's kind of worthwhile, that she was a street performer. And she talked about what she learned in giving people the opportunity to give. And I do think that there's opportunity here. I think so we at the Newmark School, besides our master's in journalism and our master's in engagement journalism and our program in news, innovation, and leadership, and by the way, your listeners should send your up-and-coming executives to that. We also redid our entrepreneurial journalism program, which I started years ago with Jeremy Kaplan. And it now is a 100-day online-only effort for the content creators serving a community. And they learn how to use Kickstarter and Patreon and Substack and Medium and YouTube, and all these tools exist to cadge up enough revenue to survive as an independent journalist. Well, even I think big publishers could learn from that. I remember when I talked to Jack Conte, who was the founder of Patreon, and brought him into a meeting about membership with various publishers and broadcasters. Why doesn't every NPR station have a Patreon account for every one of their shows? Why don't we give the opportunity for our readers and listeners to support the journalism as they want to? Why don't we? So we have to look at, when it comes to membership, new affinities. They may have an affinity to our brand, but they probably more likely have an affinity to their own circumstances, being a parent or caring about the environment. Second is rewards. Yeah, maybe they want access to content, but maybe they want access to the community or the experts or the journalists or bargains. And then, or maybe they want social status. I want to carry the tote bag that says, "Look, I support journalism."
Exactly.
And then new currencies is the third part, where yes, we want their cash, but if you, Mike, find somebody who goes out and creates 100 memberships to E&P, you'll give them a membership for free because they're golden to you. Or maybe they help us with our journalism, or maybe they help do other things. We have to rethink our relationship with people. But what this does is it changes our product strategy. The old strategy of saying we have one brand and one product for all, and we are going to bat you over the head to make you pay for it and make you feel guilty to do it, has its limits. We have discovered the limits. We're there. Okay. So we're going to have to change products to create things that are more amenable to people's uses. Now, people say to me, well, how do you do that? That's exactly. How does that scale? How does that scale? There was a small paper in Germany, I forget the name of it, and I haven't looked this up recently, but the DPA, the press agency, told me about this a few years ago, where they had a high Murdoch-like solid paywall, nobody's getting in without paying. But they realized they were losing all the young readers. So they started creating smaller mini products and around things like parenting. And then the journalist assigned to that realized they weren't really reporting, they were a community manager. It changed the relationship of the publisher with the public. They got more revenue out of more consumers in more areas, and they changed that relationship. This is all possible. It's been possible for years, and I keep banging this drum. I want to see more people trying these kinds of things. Understanding their staff is now tiny, experimentation is risky, it's expensive, but what choice do we have?
All right, I'm going to move on our speed dating round. This is the one is interesting. Censorship is futile. I don't want to know where you lean politically. And people are starting to get on my case about where they think we lean politically. But when a president of the United States stood up and said the media is the enemy of the people, and then they call this cancel culture. You say this is a futile. Deplatforming is wrong. In other words, Twitter should not.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, then I got this all wrong.
I'm not saying that.
Okay, what are you saying when you say
censorship is the act of government and the act of high authority?
So
and
a business
it's always going to be futile. It's just going to be futile because it'll find its way out. It will eke out some other way. Point one. Point two is that editing and producing is also speech. So I believe strongly that a publisher and a platform has the absolute right to decide what to carry and what not to carry. And that's not censorship. That is choice. And the analogy is clear. If the government said in Texas that Twitter must carry Donald Trump, that's equivalent to going to the Houston Chronicle and saying you must carry Donald Trump. That's abhorrent in a First Amendment world. So I believe strongly in that. But I also think that the problem now is that we're concentrating. This is in my study for the book, The Gutenberg Parenthesis, I saw this again and again and again. Whenever there's a mechanism where there's new opportunities for speech, there's a reflex to control it. Oh my God, terrible things are happening. The first call for censorship known was in 1470. Niccolo Perotti was pissed off at a bad translation of Pliny, and he said to the Pope, you got to do something. But he wasn't looking for censorship. What he was looking for was editing. He was looking for quality control. And we invented the institutions of editing and publishing to do that in print. What are the institutions now in a time of abundant speech to find the good stuff? All we're doing right now is concentrating on the bad stuff. And that's not going to get us far. It's going to get us a slightly less bad internet. What we need to do is to create the institutions that exist, like newspapers, like magazines, to find the good stuff.
Let's circle back to I'm going to give you an analogy. In my early days of broadcasting, 1984, I came to Maine as a Morning Man program director. I did a joke about a third-party spoiler gubernatorial candidate named Joe Ritchie, who ran the racetrack, but everybody thought was mafia. And all I said when I came back from my vacation, where's my Joe Ritchie poster? The one that says, vote for me or I'll break your legs. Ha, ha, ha. I'm on 60 Minutes next month with Ed Bradley because this guy was just getting a whole piece about him. But in those days, I had to offer equal time. It was called fairness doctrine. Then it got canceled through the Bush administration, and Rush Limbaugh evolved. And now we're in a culture where you don't have to have any fairness in media, meaning, but okay, what I'm trying to say is, should there not be some way to go back to getting rid of this bias bull that just, in these echo chambers that's going on and on and on, or am I overthinking this whole thing and just let it be out there as entertainment?
There's a commonly held belief that we're in echo chambers made that way by the internet, but the research says that's not true at all. The research says that people on the internet are more exposed to opposition. And there's another argument that says the internet makes us hate. But there's also research, Michael Bong-Peterson in Denmark, there's a new paper just out, that says actually no. Our filter bubbles are the filter bubbles we maintain in our real lives. What the internet does is it pops those bubbles. It exposes us to the people we already hate and gives us the spitballs to throw at them. And the skill we've got to learn here is in a time of abundant speech is to learn to live together again. Now, on the right, you don't want to get into politics, but everybody knows I'm left. So let's be transparent about that.
Duh.
So what I see happening on the right, so I'll piss off some people even more. What we see happening on the right is saying that criticism is censorship.
Exactly.
You can't criticize me. That's canceling me. That's ridiculous. The right is also saying, however, that you must carry our speech. Well, that's censorship in its own way, because that's imposed speech, and that's not free speech. What I'm saying is the speech is going to be out there no matter what. You just can't do anything about that. Yes, platforms and publishers have a right and responsibility, which Section 230 provides them, to enable them to moderate that speech, to make choices, to make responsible choices. And they should exercise that by all means. Not because the government is telling them to go one way or the other, but because they have the right to do that.
When you say that print, okay, we're moving to the new speed dating topic. I have one more after this because we're going to have to wrap this up. And I could go on for hours on every individual topic. But let's
Beer's on me, Mike. Beer's on me.
Okay, so let's get to death of print. Death of magazines. I mean, and I keynoted the niche media conference in Washington, D.C., like 4,300. Very profitable, very narrow B2B publications like mine. E&P is now profitable. Took me 3 years. Print's just in the middle. It's a very small part of it. I mean, out of our audience of 49,000, many transients, print's a small number. It's not my most profitable product, but I print proudly every month because it's a differentiator. Do you mind the fact that people call themselves magazines? Do you mind that they make my hometown newspaper here in Tampa Bay doesn't even print 5 out of 7 days a week and does a flip book version? Do you call that still printing? When you say print is dying, what do you mean? Just the tree and the newsprint? What do you mean?
I've got nothing against print. My wife is pissed off that I have all these books here and I have boxes of my clips downstairs in the basement. I still love print. Emotionally, I agree with those who do. What I'm saying is that it's not a sustainable model. And we've got to get past that idea that we are dependent upon it. That's my argument. The magazine I started, Entertainment Weekly, is now out of print. It should have gone out of print a while ago. And what I realized beyond that, and it's my baby, I loved starting it, but it had a moment in time. And in my study of magazines for the Object Lessons magazine book coming up, I came to realize that magazines almost all have their time. And they come and they go. Life magazine, right, was something that mattered greatly to this country. Life and Look were picture magazines. They were replaced by the pictures of TV. Interestingly, at the same time that Life and Look died, Ebony grew because black people weren't on TV. White people were on TV and they went there. Black people weren't, and Ebony grew. And Ebony had its important time in our history. Harper's, when it started in 1850, had a curatorial mission to say, we're going to find the best stuff and bring it to you. I want more of that online now. Now, whether something is called a magazine or not, or a newspaper or not, I don't know that I care.
See, because that's the thing. We're going to be launching a new vertical on it in January because, the News Media Alliance just merged with the Magazine Association of America. But I think more are calling it niche. It doesn't mean if you're a magazine or not, but you're owning a vertical. And in that vertical, you have just like you said, a specific audience you can cater to, and you find ways to connect the advertisers to the audience, correct?
Right. And so this is what I started with Carrie Brown, a program in engagement journalism at the Newmark School, where what we teach is to start with the community. In marketing terms, you call it a niche, but we call it a community.
Right, exactly.
Terms, right?
Define it first, right? Know who it is.
It's got to be the important thing here, Mike, is it's got to be a self-definition of a community, not an external definition.
No.
Like a Yankelovich sector. It has to be the community's own definition of itself. And how do we serve that community? And out of that comes a journalistic strategy. The skill scales. Once you start to learn how to serve communities this way and people feel actually involved in it, I think we'll have more loyalty. I think we'll have more opportunity. The business also comes along because you now get first-party data, right? Parents example. I know you're a parent. I can target parent advertising to you. I can find local parenting advertisers. I can do parent commerce. But I also, again, have the potential to get money from you as an individual consumer, and I have more loyalty from you. So I argue we've got to shift to a community-based strategy. I think that's true from our students in entrepreneurial who start their own niche products, but it can also be true from a big old newspaper that can convert and discover the communities under its nose.
there's going to be thousands of people listening to this, and because you stay at a very high level ethereal. I'm not being critical on your theories of where the industry is going, but then you're going to have a guy or a girl who's managing a paper in a market of 25,000, or just call it a voice of record, who's saying this is all well and good, but how am I going to survive through the next 5 years? And your answer seems to be, it's just we're ready for a bunch of turmoil, get used to it, and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a newspaper I won't name before the pandemic some years ago, and this is what you mentioned, the book I wrote, Geeks Bearing Gifts, which is kind of air quote book that we published at the school, and then I wrote the post, if I ran a newspaper, not like that'll ever happen. And this came out of visiting a certain big newspaper, where I tried to get them to talk through a community strategy. And the only problem was everybody I talked to then left. That was that, because that's what happens. But no, I do believe that this is practical and doable. And I'm happy to talk to any of your listeners and try to talk through how it might happen. But do I guarantee success? No, I don't. But I don't know what else to do. But to try to build better, deeper, more meaningful relationships with communities that we serve, especially and including people we haven't served well in the past, and build from there.
Okay, we're going to leave on this one. In one of your Post-it notes, you said, when will the first editor-in-chief or publisher of a major news operation come from the ranks of people known as audience or product? The answer is, I found that person. I would like to educate you if I may.
Bravo.
I'm proud of that, because I come from the business side, and I think taking over E&P, I had to put a business, because you didn't say this. When you build the community, you also ask yourself the question, is it profitable? Can I make money owning the news publishing decision maker, taking out my competition, and owning that very small yet decision-making audience? In other words, if I owned every bowler in a town, what do they buy? And how many advertise? You talk family, we're talking thousands of advertising categories. But I found the person, and I want to educate you if I may. It's Hearst, Connecticut. Her name is Wendy Metcalf. They have over 1,000% increase in their digital subscriptions, because she comes from an audience side and a marketing side with a journalistic bent. So she's VP of content, and she starts every meeting every morning with her team with metrics. Did you know that? She actually starts with the whole news department and says, let's look at what they like. Not that, and she'll always say, but I don't govern it. Sometimes we'll chase a story that doesn't have metrics. But what are they searching on Google? What are they reading, and what are they clicking? How long are they staying on stories? And she gives them a run through on the stuff we have today that you and I didn't have back in 2001 and 2. Do you agree with that philosophy? That was going to be my question.
Yeah, I think doing it, as is my obnoxious want, I'll push it a little bit farther to say that the first step is to do what she's doing, which is to see the uptake of what we already produce. There's a brilliant guy at The Guardian named Chris Moran who has amazing tools to do this. The next step is to have the public assign us. And no, folks, I don't mean they assign us to write about Kardashians and cats all the time. Okay. I mean that we listen well enough to understand what are the issues in their lives and the needs in their lives, and we try to meet that. I consulted for About.com for the New York Times when they bought it, and it would look at the questions people were asking online and then say, let's have an answer to that. Why can't that happen on newspapers as well? So what are the mechanisms we have to listen to the public, to understand well what their needs are? And I don't mean the individual reporter going in, I mean more systematic than that, to listen to the communities. And then to start the journalism there. There's a startup called Hearken that, it's not even a startup anymore, that tried to have a discipline of how news organizations could listen to the curiosities and needs and desires of the public we serve. So yes, that's what an engagement audience social strategy is to me. It's not so much about finding new ways to speak to the public, it's new ways to listen to the public and then to meet the needs that we find. And then how do you do that? That's where product comes in. So in product, you say, okay, the New York Times says, let's invent a food app which serves foodies, and we're going to make more money by doing that. Or we invent the parents site where we don't really do a lot of content, but we put parents together so they can talk and share their sleepless nights, things like that. So the audience strategy and product strategy, what's amazing to me is that these are new job descriptions that didn't exist 20, 25 years ago. And so for my students, there's a huge opportunity to look at doing new things in the field. And in the end, I think that when I was on newspapers, I argued that the circulation director should report to the editor-in-chief, and both of their asses should be on the line for successfully serving the public. Well, advance now, the audience people and the product people start their work with data from the public, the audience. And so they're the ones who have the receipts. They're the ones who have the data that says, this is what we know the public likes, either from what they read or from what we heard from them. That this is what we'll build to respond, and then we'll see whether that works. That discipline of being directly connected to the public, I think politically in newsrooms should win the day more than our old view, which is, well, I'm really great at rewrite and I know how to get content out fast. Okay. That mattered back in the day. If you were really good, I was an old rewrite man in the day. That was a skill that we used. Production mattered because we had this daily miracle of the newspaper. That's changed. And we have new job descriptions, new ways to look at the world, new skills. And I think that if we let them take over our newsrooms, there's going to be a new way to look at things. And I think that could be part of the path to success.
Jeff, I'm going to leave you with this thought. When I was a young pup in my barely 30, went to my first convention at the Lowe's Anatole Hotel in Dallas, never saw a glass elevator in my life. And I met my hero, Mike Joseph, invented Top 40 radio. He was an older man then. He's passed many years ago. And I looked at him in an elevator. He had given a keynote. And I said, Mr. Joseph, help me. This is my first management position. I'm running a small radio station. What advice would you give? And he leaned into me with gin-soaked breath and said, find out what they want and give it to them. Yeah. And I've never forgot that. In a way, whenever you get lost in the weeds, I don't know if that exactly parallels what you're saying, but don't just go off in different directions. Explore who you're trying to target, learn what they want, and then try to provide it. Is that what you're just basically? Yeah,
and it doesn't just mean being responsive to more cats, and few Kardashians.
I get that.
Right? What it means is, what are we doing to improve the public discourse? I look at our horse race coverage in politics, and people like me love to smash on the horse race coverage because we should, because it's awful, because it doesn't inform the electorate. At the end, I just tweeted because I was angry about seeing something online, and I get that way in the morning. It's worse in the evening after Cabernet. But I said, I wish that every editor and every producer in this political season would end every day saying, what did we do today that informs the electorate? And a story about polling doesn't inform the electorate. A story about prognostication and predicting things doesn't inform the electorate. And so what I'm saying is, in this case, no, it doesn't come from saying that the public told us they want only this story and not that story. It does come from our judgment still. It comes from our judgment as journalists saying this is what the electorate should be knowing to do this. There's a little startup called Spaceship Media. I'll end with this. Spaceship, run by E. Perlman, convenes communities into productive discourse. And their first experiment, they found some Trump voters and some Clinton voters back in 2016. They talked to them all. They threw them all into a Facebook group. And it didn't take long before the people would come back and say, we're getting in trouble over here. We're getting in fights. Can you help us out? And what they were saying to the journalist with whom they had a relationship is, we want facts. We want an informed discussion. Can you help us do that? And then what Spaceship delivers is not stories. They deliver what they call fact stacks. Here's what the facts you asked for. Here's the things you're confused about. Here's the things people are wrong about. Here's the things you want to know. That's still journalism. We still can make that judgment and do that. And we should judge our success or failure on the quality of that public civic discourse. If we judge our success or failure on that gauge today, we're failing. You got to figure out something better for democracy.
This was the longest. I mean, you know how attention spans are. I get a lot of grief saying, why are your vodcasts so long? They should only be 15 minutes. We've gone 49. And I didn't even get to 3 important topics. At the time of this recording, there's a major newspaper on strike. At the time of this recording, Gannett had issued a memo, basically, again, downsizing and squeezing. We didn't even discuss those brands and how long they could possibly survive, or will they die? Would you just start up a new brand or try to save the old brands? There's so much more. Can we just call this Jeff Jarvis Part 1 and hopefully get you locked down?
Only if your audience can tolerate it.
Well, we'll make them, because this is good stuff. Jeff Jarvis, since 2006, director of the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the Craig Newmark of Craiglist Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Real fun.